And please welcome to the stage Anthony Lombados, CEO of Footers Catering, founder of Mybe Tribe, and CTLF board advisor.
All right, there we go. Who remembers what they wanted to be as a kid when they grew up? Anybody? I can tell you what I did not want to be, and that was a caterer in the family business. What I really wanted to be was a basketball player. I'd spend hours in the driveway. I loved shooting hoops, playing basketball. My mom would have to beg me to come in for dinner, and after dinner I'd beg her to go back out and play more basketball. But at high school, when I stopped growing at 5'10", my dreams of playing in the NBA quickly faded away. And I turned my attention to working in other areas of the sports industry. I went on to study sports marketing at the University of Oregon. And after a turn of events, my life changed, and I ended up back working for my dad at Footers Catering, leading the company. And there was one morning where I was particularly feeling a little bit lost and frustrated with where I was. And I was having breakfast with a mentor of mine in my Vistage chair, Bob Carruthers. It was one of those, diners where the smell of bacon fills the air, and the, waitress calls you hun. And I turned to Bob and I said, "Bob, I really missed my calling." And he said, "What do you mean, Anthony?" And I said, "Well, I should have been a college basketball coach." And he said, "Well, why? Tell me more." I'm like, "Here's the thing, Bob. I love strategy. I love thinking about a game plan. I love the fact that in college you get to recruit people to come be part of your team. And in college they want to continue to grow so you can help them learn and move to that next level. And then once they're there, you get to help them work together as a team. And they even wear nice suits, and I kind of like to wear suits, so that works too." And Bob, after a chuckle, turned to me with a straight face and said, "Anthony, you have an opportunity to do all of that right here at Footers Catering." And that moment changed my whole perspective on what my job was. I realized my job wasn't about being a caterer. It wasn't about what menu we were going to serve or how the event was going to be executed. My job was to give my team the tools that they needed to be successful, to help them grow, to be the best leader I could be. And fast forward 12 years later, and now I'm incredibly fortunate to be leading Footers Catering alongside my wife, April. And I absolutely love what I do. I'm passionate about becoming a better leader and learning how to be a better coach for my team. And so when I was introduced to Colorado Thought Leaders Forum, it was a natural place for me to invest my time and energy. There's something really, really special about being part of a group where you're open to learning new things, where it's a group that's willing to challenge one another, and a group that's dedicated, people that are dedicated to serving others. We have this concept of heart leadership, and the CTLF community really embraces that heart leadership and this idea that heart leadership doesn't have to come at the expense of business results. And in fact, it can do the opposite, and as my friend Tommy Spalding says, drives love-driven results. It's an honor to be here today to welcome you to this incredible event put on by Colorado Thought Leaders Forum and Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. For those of you that don't know Stephen Kotler, you're in for a treat. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He's a journalist. He's an entrepreneur. His articles have appeared in over 70 different publications, from Wired Magazine, Time Magazine, GQ, National Geographic Adventure. And he's one of the world's leading experts on ultimate human performance. He is also the founder of the Flow Research Collective, which studies the brain during peak states of performance to understand how we can unlock that state of flow more often and achieve new possibilities for human potential.
My name is Stephen Kotler. I'm an author, I'm a journalist, and I am the founder and executive director of the Flow Research Collective. And if you're not familiar with us, which I'm assuming you're not, we are a research and training organization. And on the research side, we study ultimate human performance, what goes on in the brain during flow. We work with everybody from kind of UCLA, USC, Stanford, all the way to organizations like Deloitte. And on the training side, we train everybody from the U.S. Special Forces through Fortune 100 top executives through tens of thousands of general public folks. And what we focus on is, what does it take to be your best when it matters most? What does it take for individuals, for organizations, for even institutions to level up their game like never before? What does it take to achieve paradigm shifting, nothing is ever the same again breakthroughs? And really, in a phrase, if you can sort of get past the hyperbole and understand I mean this very, very practically, what does it actually take to do the impossible? So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be with you guys for about the next 90 minutes. I'm going to probably talk for about 45 of them, and then we're going to work through a number of exercises together. What we're going to be doing, I challenged my team. So I challenged a team of about 11 of the best psychologists in the world and 10 of the best neuroscientists in the world to put together the tightest package, biggest leverage we can give you guys in your own life in 90 minutes. So there a lot of brain power went into thinking about this particular presentation. But as a way of introducing this idea, I thought I'd start with this idea of what does it take to do the impossible. And it's an odd question, and I thought as a way of introducing it, I would give you a little background. I would tell you where I started with this question and how I came to be interested in it. So in the early 1990s, when I was first becoming a journalist, action sports were first becoming a really hot topic. So surfing, skiing, snowboarding, rock climbing, and the like. X Games were getting going, the gravity games, all these sports were beginning to catch the public's imagination, and magazines, newspapers were getting interested in this story. There were not a ton of journalists back then who knew anything about these sports. So it meant if you could write in ski or write in rock climb or write in surf, there was a lot of work. I couldn't do any of those things very well. But I was really attracted to the sports, and I was desperately broke. So I lied to my editors, and I was lucky enough to spend about a decade chasing professional athletes around mountains and across oceans. And I will tell you, we're not where we're supposed to be. Now we are. I will tell you that if you are not a professional athlete and you spend all your time chasing professional athletes around mountains and across oceans, you're going to break some things. I broke a lot of things. And this meant I took a lot of time off. So what would happen is I'd be hanging out with people, I would snap this or that, and I'd get shoved onto the couch for 3 or 4 months. And when I came back, the progress I saw was astounding. It was amazing. It was leaps and bounds kind of stuff, and it made absolutely no sense. And we're not going to linger in action sports. I just want to give you a quick example of what we were looking at. So surfing is an ancient sport. It dates back to the 4th century AD. And progress was incredibly slow. From the 4th century AD to 1996, the biggest wave anybody had ever surfed was 25 feet. Above that was believed completely impossible. Never been done, never going to be done. There are physics papers written about how it's impossible for a surfer to paddle into a wave that's over 25 feet tall, the surfer wave that was over 25 feet tall. And yet, as you can see from this photo, here we are, little over 2 decades later, surfers are routinely paddling into waves that are over 60 feet tall and towing into waves that are over 100 feet tall. And it wasn't just surfing. It was pretty much across the board in action sports. And this caught my attention for a number of reasons. First, the obvious, right? The impossible kept falling over and over and over again. The second thing that was much more interesting to me was the folks I knew, action sport athletes in the early 1990s, were a rowdy, punk rock, irreverent bunch of people with very few natural advantages. So most of the people I knew had extremely difficult childhoods. They came from ridiculously broken homes. They had very little education as a rule and had almost no money. And yet here they were on a semi-regular basis, extending the bounds of human possibility, literally redefining the limits of our species. And I wanted to understand this. I absolutely needed to know why this was happening. Simultaneously, at that point, I'd probably broken 70 bones or so. I knew that if I didn't take my question out of action sports, I was going to kill myself. For sure, that was definitely going to happen. So that's what I did. I took this question of what does it take to do the impossible into pretty much every domain imaginable. And I wrote books about what I discovered. So Tomorrowland, for example, is a look at those kind of maverick innovators who turned science fiction ideas into science fact technology, who literally did the impossible of dreaming up the future. In bold, it was upstart entrepreneurs, Larry Page, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Elon Musk, folks who had built world-changing businesses in near record time, and often in domains where nobody even thought you could start businesses. In abundance, I teamed up with my good friend Peter Diamandis, the founder of the X Prize Foundation, Singularity University, and we looked at individuals and small teams of people who were taking on grand global challenges: poverty, energy, water scarcity, energy scarcity, and so forth, and succeeding against challenges that 10 to 20 years earlier, large corporations and big governments were failing to solve. And it turns out it doesn't actually matter what domain you look at. Could be art, could be culture, could be sports, could be science, could be business. Across the boards, whenever the impossible becomes possible, you are seeing a state of consciousness known to researchers as flow. Now, you may know flow by a lot of other names. Being in the zone, runner's high, for example. If you're a basketball player, it's often being unconscious. If you're a stand-up comic, it's the forever box. If you happen to be a beatnik jazz musician, then you're in the pocket. The lingo is essentially endless. Flow is a technical term. We'll talk about where it comes from and what it actually means, but it is scientifically defined as an optimal state of consciousness, one where we feel our best and we perform our best. And more specifically, it refers to all those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on the task at hand that everything else just seems to disappear. So action and awareness will start to merge. Time will dilate, which is a really fancy way of saying it passes strangely. So sometimes, occasionally, you'll get a freeze frame effect. Maybe to anybody who's been in a car crash, time will slow down. More frequently, time speeds up and 5 hours go by in like 5 minutes. Simultaneously, our sense of self, our sense of self-consciousness will also disappear completely, and throughout the entire experience, all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. Flow science itself is actually quite old. It dates back to the 1870s. The first, in Western culture, actually the first term for flow was a German term, Rausch. It was coined by Goethe and used a lot by Nietzsche, who actually was a high-performance philosopher who spent a lot of his career, nobody knows this, but he spent a lot of his career working on flow. A lot of the early experiments run in what has become cognitive psychology and cognitive neuroscience that was first emerging in the 1870s were run on flow. Research took a huge surge forward in the 1970s when this man, this is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he's the former chairman of the University of Chicago Psychology Department, and Csikszentmihalyi got really interested in this question of what makes life worth living and this question of optimal performance. And what he did is he went around the globe conducting still one of the largest experiments that's ever been run in psychology, talking to tens of thousands of people about the times in their life when they felt their best and they performed their best. He learned a number of things along the way, and one of them is that flow has core characteristics. So when psychologists define flow, they define flow by these 6 characteristics. And when they're all present together, that's a pretty good sign that you're in flow. So there's complete concentration, so our focus is completely in the right here, right now. There's the merger of action and awareness, and that's a very fancy term, but we've all had that experience. You guys have all sat down, you write a quickie email, right, and you look up an hour later, and you've kind of written an essay, right? That is the merger of action and awareness. You sort of became the email, and everything else dropped away. Loss of your sense of self, time dilation we talked about. There's also a complete sense of control. So you feel like you're in control of things that you don't normally have control over. So this could be a business leader in a meeting, running a meeting more fluidly and cleanly than ever before, right? Everything is just working perfectly and it never goes that way. This could be a skier pulling off moves going down the mountain that they've never managed to put together all at once before, controlling a situation that normally feels uncontrollable. And autotelic experience will come back to this idea. Autotelic is a fancy way of saying an end in itself. Autotelic means Once an experience starts producing flow, it feels so amazingly good that we will go extraordinarily far out of our way to get more of it. Because Csikszentmihalyi discovered flow is psychologically definable, made a second major discovery, which the state is measurable. So we have about 5 different extremely well-validated psychometric instruments, which are a really fancy way of saying surveys, for measuring flow. And what they really measure is those 6 core characteristics and how much you're experiencing them at any one moment. We don't yet have a biophysiological-based flow detector, something that can just read your physiology and tell you if you're in a flow or not. But my team has been working really hard on this. It's kind of a huge international effort. And we think we're a couple of years away from actually being able to measure it that way. There's a lot of kind of neurobiological signals for flow, what's going on in the brain. We're going to get to that in a little bit, but that's what we're trying to measure. Most importantly, I think, Csikszentmihalyi discovered that flow is a universal. It shows up in anyone, anywhere, provided certain initial conditions are met. And we know this because when he was going around the world, I said earlier he talked to everybody, he really did. He started out talking to experts, and this was everybody from stockbrokers to business leaders to surgeons to rock climbers and dancers. And then he just moved into the general population. He talked to elderly Korean women, Japanese teenage motorcycle gang members, Detroit assembly line workers. If you can get flow on an assembly line in Detroit, you can get into flow anywhere, I think. So he figured out that flow shows up everywhere, in everyone, provided these initial conditions are met. The next thing he discovered is that flow is a spectrum experience. So what I mean by that is it's a lot like any emotion. So take anger. You can be a little irked. You can be homicidally murderous, right? It's the same emotion, just different points on a scale. Flow works the same way. So you can be in a state of microflow. Microflow is when a couple of those conditions show up at once, or maybe all 6 show up, but they're turned down really, really low. This, for example, is that quickie email you sat down to write, right? And maybe you didn't notice your body. When I say self disappears, in macro flow, at the other end of the scale, self completely vanishes, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at the micro scale, maybe you didn't notice you had to go to the bathroom until that email is done and you pop back into consciousness. You're like, wow, I really have to go to the bathroom. You didn't notice you had a body for that past hour. Those sensations went away. That's sort of what we mean a little bit by selflessness. On the other side of the scale is macro flow. Now, macro flow is when all 6 of these characteristics show up at once, and that gets really peculiar. In fact, for the first 70 years of flow research, from 1870 to roughly 1954, people thought flow, especially macro flow, was a spiritual experience. It only showed up in religious and spiritual communities. And then a psychologist named Abraham Maslow was doing this global study of success. He was running around the world talking to the most successful people he could find, Eleanor Roosevelt, Albert Einstein, et cetera, et cetera. It was a huge study group. And he learned 2 things. One, everybody in his study group said, God, when I'm at my best, I have found a way to put myself in this state of flow, which Maslow called peak experiences. Csikszentmihalyi changed the name. We'll talk about why in half a second. And the trick was everybody in his study group was an atheist. Nobody was spiritual. Nobody was religious. None of them believed in God. So suddenly mystical experiences were out. Peak experiences were in. Csikszentmihalyi came along next. And the reason flow is now known as flow is when he was running around the world talking to all these people about the times in their life they felt their best and they performed their best, everybody basically said the same thing. They said, when I'm at my best, I'm in this state where every decision, every action seems to flow seamlessly, effortlessly from the last. So flow is actually a phenomenological description of the state, meaning it describes how the state makes us feel. This also, by the way, gives you a first look at kind of a more shorthand, practical definition of what flow is. For every action and every decision to flow seamlessly, effortlessly from the last, flow is a state of high-speed, near-perfect decision-making. An important safety tip. I said near-perfect, not perfect. Scott Schmidt, one of the early extreme skiers, liked to say, flow makes me feel like Superman up until the moment I'm not. So important safety tip, right? Finally, Csikszentmihalyi discovered that flow is fundamental. It is fundamental to well-being, happiness, overall life satisfaction, and meaning. When you test people, the people who score off the charts for overall meaning and life satisfaction, the people who have the most meaningful lives on earth, they always are the people with the most flow in their lives. In fact, positive psychologists who have been studying happiness and well-being and life satisfaction really diligently for about 30 years now believe there are only 3 levels of well-being that are possible on this planet. The first level is just general happiness. It's how do you feel right here, right now, in this moment. And it turns out there's not a hell of a lot you can do to change how you feel in the right here, right now. We'll talk about some of the things that are able to tune this up, but we have what are known as emotional set points. These are established genetically, a little bit environmentally, somewhere between the ages of 9 and 12. We have a low point. This is the worst we're going to feel on the planet. We have a high point. This is the best we're going to feel on the planet. And our entire lives take place in between. There are only 2 ways to make your life worse. You really live inside it, but if you have chronic unemployment or the death of a child, that will lower the low point. The only way to raise the high point is frequent access to flow. And that brings us to level 2 happiness on the planet. Level 2 happiness is they use engagement or enjoyment as the technical term, and this is a high flow lifestyle. So this could be, we're in Colorado, this could be anybody who kind of lives in a ski town, works construction in the summer so they could ski all winter. That's a high flow lifestyle. Music is a very big producer of flow. So people in bands, improv theater, improv comedy, et cetera, these are all high flow lifestyles. The best we get to feel on the planet, meaning, is a high flow lifestyle attached to purpose, which means the thing that is producing flow for you is also the thing you are here to do. So I get a tremendous amount of flow from writing, and I'm here to be a writer, as far as I can tell. It's about the only thing I'm good at. So that would put me in that category. So there's 3 levels of well-being right now available to you on the planet. Flow is at the center of the 2 highest categories, really critical. So after all this sort of early work got done on flow, the next question that people were wondering is, okay, so this is optimal performance. Cool. How optimal? What are we really talking about here? The answer, pretty damn optimal. So we now know in athletics and sports, as Coach said, pretty much any time a world championship has been won, there's a flow state at its heart. Every gold medal you've seen, there's probably a flow state at its heart. In the arts, in science, in technology, in business, flow is responsible for huge paradigm-shifting breakthroughs. In fact, business, we have some of the clearest data. McKinsey spent a decade studying top executives in flow, and they concluded that top executives across the board on average report being 5 times more productive in flow than out of flow. Put that in context, 5 times more productive is 500% more productive. It means you could go to work on Monday, spend Monday in a flow state, take Tuesday through Friday off, you're going to get as much done as your steady state peers. 2 days a week in flow, and you are 1,000% more productive than the competition. And I mention this for 2 reasons. One, I mention this because this is available to each and every one of you. And I mention it because my organization, a lot of other people's organizations, the cat is out of the bag. This is no longer secret knowledge. We are training up organization after organization after organization. Chances are we are training up, we are already training up for most of the people in this room, depending on what you do, we've already trained up some of your competition. And if your competition ends up 1,000% more productive per week than you are, how long do you think you get to stay in business? So at this point, moving into the 21st century, for this reason and reasons we're going to come to, I think is just sound business practices. So the full look at the flow in Business Advantage, and I will talk about the science of why all this happens in a minute, because these sound like outrageous numbers. They even sound like outrageous numbers to me, and I know I wrote them, and I know what's behind them all. Motivation and productivity, as I said, go about 500% in flow. Learning and memory, this is based on research run by the Department of Defense on soldiers primarily. Soldiers in flow learning 240% faster than normal. Creativity and innovation, this is work done by my organization, done at the University of Sydney in Australia and done at Harvard. We find creativity and innovation will spike 400 to 700%, enormous leap. And as Coach Carl actually mentioned, and this is actually work done by a woman named Teresa Amabile at Harvard, she figured out that heightened creativity, that heightened innovation will outlast the flow state by a day, maybe two. Now, flow, as a general rule for neurobiological reasons, can last a couple of hours. There are extreme cases. For example, there is an altruism-based flow state known as helper's high. It was discovered by Alan Lukes, who runs Big Brothers Big Sisters, and it's a high you get in from helping others, a flow high you get from helping others, and it, for reasons that nobody can quite figure out yet, will sometimes last 2 days. So sometimes this can really stretch out the actual flow state. But in general, it's an hour to 2 hours, but that heightened creativity will stay with you for a couple of days. We also see, for reasons we talked about a second ago, meaning, well-being go through the roof. Collaboration and cooperation also get massively amplified. Empathy and environmental awareness. And environmental awareness is key, especially these days because we're up against so many great environmental challenges. If you talk to most psychologists about why are we in the middle of climate change, why are we in the middle of species die-off, why is the environment falling apart around us, what they will tell you is the brain takes in a huge amount of information every second, right? 11 million bits of information per second, way too much for it to process. So it sifts, it sorts, it throws out stuff that is not critical for survival. Well, if you live in boxes and you stare at boxes all day long, what do you think the brain filters out? The natural world goes away. So one of the reasons we're in a gigantic environmental crisis is because most people can't actually even perceive the very thing we're trying to save. Flow changes that. So after all this work on kind of what did we mean by optimal performance got done, the next question, of course, was where the hell is this coming from, right? Like what is causing flow in the brain and the body? Why are we seeing such optimal performance? And here, we got a great assist from neuroscience. So neuroscience as a field has been accelerating wildly over the past 25 years. Brain imaging technology is moving very, very quickly. And for the very first time in history, we've sort of been able to peel back the hood on flow, see where the state is coming and why it's coming. And you're looking actually at one example of these experiments. So this is an experiment designed by Stanford neuroscientist David Eagleman. I have been hoisted 150 feet into the air, and I'm being dropped, free-falling, into a circus net. And I've got a perceptual chronometer on my wrist. We're trying to figure out why time passes so strangely in flow. Two things to note. We did sort of make some progress on that one, and I'll talk about that in a second. Second thing to know, 6 to 8 months worth of chiropractic work till I could walk right again after this particular experiment. So I want you to know I bled for this data, people. So what we learned along the way turns most of our older ideas about high performance upside down. And the old idea of high performance, and you guys are probably familiar with this idea, it's what we now refer to as the 10% brain myth. It is the idea that at any one point, you are only using a small portion of your brain, say 10%. So flow, aka ultimate performance, it must be the full brain on overdrive. That's got to be what's going on. And it turns out we had it exactly backwards. In flow, we are not using more of the brain, we're actually using less of the brain. The technical term is transient, meaning temporary, hypofrontality. Hypo, H-Y-P-O, it's the opposite of hyper. It means to slow down, to shut down, to deactivate. And frontality refers to your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is right back there. Now, your prefrontal cortex, really powerful part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that does complex logical decision-making, long-term planning, your sense of willpower, lives there. Your sense of morality lives there. In flow, the brain performs an efficiency exchange. It says, okay, you need all this extra energy for focus and attention, so we're going to shut down non-critical structures and repurpose the energy for focus and attention. And huge swatches of the prefrontal cortex go down in flow. This explains some of flow's more peculiar effects and some of flow's impact on performance. So when the prefrontal cortex deactivates, one of the things that happens is time goes away. And the reason is that what we call time is actually a calculation. It's performed by a bunch of different structures in the prefrontal cortex working together. It's a network effect. And like any network, right, you start shutting down nodes in the network, the whole network goes down. When this happens, when we're in flow, we lose the ability to separate past from present from future. So we're plunged into what psychologists call the deep now, what, if you're more spiritually inclined, you might refer to as the eternal present. If you've ever experienced a state of awe, you look up at the night sky and you're overwhelmed by the galaxies you see, and kind of reality seems to pause just for a second. You get sucked in. That's the front end of a flow state. That's this experience. That's what's going on. This turns out to have a big impact on performance. If you think about fear and anxiety, unless you are a soldier in combat, an action sport athlete in a crisis situation, or a professional boxer or martial artist, very little of your fears live in the right here, right now. I'm going to do this. I'm going to fall off at some point. That's going to happen. I'm just going to say that now. Very little of the things that scare you are in the right here, right now, right? They're usually horrible stuff that happened in the past that you'd like to avoid happening again in the present, or it's scary shit that might happen sometime in the future that you're trying to steer around from the present. So if I remove past and future from your consciousness, what happens? Anxiety levels plummet. Your stress hormones literally get flushed out of your system. So we like to say that flow resets the nervous system back to kind of zero. This is one of the reasons why. And as a result, what do we see? Risk-taking goes way up. Creativity goes way up. Same thing happens to our sense of self. Why does self vanish in flow? Because self is another calculation performed all over the prefrontal cortex, actually all over the brain, but mostly in the prefrontal cortex. And it's another network. So as that network goes down, we lose the ability to have a sense of self. This, again, has a huge impact on performance. One of the reasons is there's a part of your brain over here called the dorsolateral, which basically means upside, or of your brain, prefrontal cortex. This is where your inner critic lives. So that nagging, always on, defeatist voice in your head, for the older folks in the room, this is your inner Woody Allen. In flow, Woody gets silent. So we experience this emotionally as liberation, as freedom, as absolute joy. And what's actually happening is we are literally just getting out of our own way. So creativity goes through the roof. Why? Because you're no longer doubting every neat idea you've had, right? Risk-taking, which is critical for business and entrepreneurship, also goes through the roof. Now, beyond these changes in kind of neural anatomical function, we also see changes in neurochemistry. So neurochemistry is a big fancy word, and all it means is when the brain needs to communicate with itself or the rest of the body, it does it in one of two ways. It sends out electrical signals or it sends out chemical signals. So this, when we talk about neurochemicals, we're literally just talking about signaling molecules. And really, the only signal they're sending is they're telling parts of the brain, do more of this or do less of this. And in flow, we get 5 of the most potent neurochemicals the brain can produce: norepinephrine, dopamine, endorphins, anandamide, and serotonin. Appears that flow is the only time we get all 5 of these chemicals at once. And if you really want to understand why flow helps the impossible become possible, it's helpful to understand how these neurochemicals influence the 3 sides of the so-called high-performance triangle, which is motivation, learning, and creativity. Now, the high-performance triangle is so named because when researchers look for what are the skills that we need to thrive in the 21st century, in the right here, right now, what tops the list, Motivation, learning, and creativity tops everybody's lists. So to understand how flow impacts these, I'm going to break down kind of how the neurochemicals impact each of these categories. I'll start with motivation. So these neurochemicals are multi-tools. They do lots of different jobs in the brain. These neurochemicals are feel-good reward chemicals. They reward good behavior. That is, behavior that helps us survive from an evolutionary perspective. This is how the brain motivates us to do that. We do something that helps us survive, we get a feel-good reward chemical. So endorphins, one of the chemicals you get, this is linked to maternal bonding. So when a mother picks up her baby, that great feeling you get, that's endorphins. It's rewarding the fact that affection is going to help you keep that child alive longer. That's how these things work. Now, the 5 neurochemicals that show up, I said they're the 5 most potent pleasure drugs the brain can produce, and I mean seriously pleasurable. So dopamine, for example. Dopamine is, people talk about it as the principal reward chemical. Cocaine is widely considered the most addictive drug on earth. All that happens when somebody uses cocaine is it forces the brain to release large quantities of dopamine and then blocks its reuptake. So dopamine is the reason cocaine is the most addictive drug on earth. Yet dopamine is only one of the neurochemicals you get. Endorphins, which I talked about a second ago, these are internal opiates, basically. Right? They're the internal self-made, pain-killing, pleasure-producing version of Oxycontin, morphine, heroin, those same chemicals. They're bonding to the same receptor sites. They're doing the same things. And just to give you an idea, there are about 20 different endorphins in the brain. The most common one is 100 times more potent than medical morphine. The interesting thing is there is a street drug version of every one of these neurochemicals. That's why these drugs actually work. If we didn't have internal neurochemicals that bonded to the same receptors, the drugs wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't have anywhere to go in the brain. Norepinephrine is essentially speed. Dopamine is essentially cocaine. Anandamide is the same psychoactive produced by marijuana. Endorphins, as I said, are heroin or Oxycontin. And what am I leaving out? Serotonin is the same chemical that produces the high underneath MDMA or LSD, depending on which channel it takes. The reason I mention all this is if you were trying to go out onto the street and cocktail those substances, it wouldn't work, right? You'd end up in a coma. You'd end up dead. You can't actually do it artificially. The brain cocktails all those substances perfectly for you, and it feels really good. When we talk about McKinsey being 500% more productive in flow, this feel-good neurochemistry is the reason why. That's what's driving motivation. That's what's driving productivity so much. Learning is similar. So one of the other things that neurochemicals do is they tag experiences as important, save for later. Quick shorthand for how learning and memory works in the brain, the more neurochemicals that show up during an experience, the better chance the brain has of transferring it from short-term holding into long-term storage. Flow is this enormous dump of neurochemistry, which is why we tend to remember everything that happens in flow, which is why the Department of Defense found that soldiers in flow are 240%, can learn 240% faster than normal. Interestingly, and you can actually see this online. A friend of mine, Chris Burka, she runs a company called Advanced Brain Monitoring. She gave a TED Talk about this, so you can Google this afterwards and see it. She did a bunch of experiments. She was involved in that first experiment. And then they decided they wanted to work with kind of non-military folks. So what they did is they took marksmen, archers, handgun shooters, and riflemen, and they took people who had never fired a weapon before and put them into flow and trained them up to the expert level. It took 50% less time. So we've heard about Malcolm Gladwell's fabled 10,000 hours to mastery. We've also all heard that that's not a real number, but it's a good metaphor, so I'm going to continue to use it for a second. What the research seems to show is that flow can cut that in half. Finally, creativity, probably the most important skill in the 21st century, creativity and innovation. It's really interesting. So by the way, when I use the term creativity, This isn't a big fancy word. I'm literally using it in the way that scientists like to use creativity, which is the production of novel and useful ideas. So creativity is literally nothing fancier than the production of novel or useful ideas. It's also a recombinatory process. It's the product of the brain taking in novel information, combining it with older ideas, and using the results to produce something startlingly new. All the neurochemicals that show up in flow, they surround this process. So when we're in the zone, we take in more information per second. So data acquisition goes way up. We pay more attention to that incoming information, so salience massively increases. We find faster connections between that incoming information and older ideas, so what's known as pattern recognition goes through the roof. We also find faster connections between that incoming information and really far-flung outside-the-box ideas, so what's known as lateral thinking goes through the roof. And then in creativity, because it's not just enough to have a crazy, neat idea, right? You actually have to turn it into something useful, which means you have to take it public. And there's a lot of risk on taking involved in that. It's scary to do that. We feel vulnerable, we feel exposed. Well, bonus, flow massively increases risk-taking. So it surrounds the creative process, which is why in flow we see creativity spike 400 to 700%. The final kind of advantage that flow brings you, this is something that we talk a lot, meaning myself and Peter Diamandis, my occasional co-author. Peter and I have just written a new book called The Future is Faster Than You Think. It's out now. And this is something that we talk about a lot in that book. So as we all have experienced, the world is speeding up, right? Technology is moving faster and faster. The world is accelerating wildly. And we have a big problem. So our brains evolved in an era that was local and linear, meaning 200,000 years ago when our software was actually getting created for the first time, everything we encountered, everything we had to deal with in our lives was local, meaning it was roughly a day's walk away, maybe two at the outside. Linear, meaning the rate of change was really slow. Your great-great-grandfather's life was roughly the same as his great-great-grandson's life. The rate of change was really slow. Today, we live in a world that is global and exponential. Global, right? It happens in China, happens on the other side of the world. We hear about it seconds later. In fact, our computers get it milliseconds later. Exponential, meaning the rate of change is really, really quickly. So forget about the distance between grandfathers and grandchildren. Here, now, often the difference 1 month to the next is staggering, right? And our brain did not evolve to process information at this speed or at this scale. We have local and linear brains in a global and exponential world, which is one of the reasons we all feel so stressed by the speed of technology. Our brains weren't really designed to handle that speed. The only time we can turns out to be flow. In fact, funny thing, obviously, one of the things that you obviously want to do as business people is plan for the future. Really critical for business, really critical for our personal lives. In an era of exponential change and accelerated change, this is kind of difficult. What makes it even trickier is the brain. So when you think about yourself, the center of your forehead, known as the medial, the middle of your prefrontal cortex, gets really active. This is a very selfish part of your brain. It technically governs a bunch of different things, but creative self-expression is sort of the shorthand version for this. And obviously, creativity goes through the roof in flow. This gets really, really active in flow. Now, as I said, it's a very selfish part of the brain. When you think about yourself, it gets really, really active. When you think about your loved ones, it gets a little quieter. When you think about acquaintances, it gets a lot quieter. And when you think about strangers, it shuts off completely. So if I ask you to close your eyes and picture who you're going to become in 10 years and how you're going to be doing business and how you're going to be planning your life and all those things, you would think this part of your brain gets really, really active. It doesn't. It actually shuts down completely. The brain treats the person we're going to become as an absolute stranger. This is the byproduct of evolving in a local and linear world. Brain treats you as an absolute stranger. This is why people have a really hard time registering to get prostate exams or staying on diets. It's because the person who's going to benefit most from that future thing is not you as far as your brain is concerned. Flow is the only time you can project into the future and still stay active. This is one of the reasons why we talk about intuition and vision going through the roof in flow. The technical term for this is the watchtower effect. And it basically means you feel like you're in a big watchtower looking out over the plains of your life. You can see farther than ever before. So this is now all the good stuff that gets you in flow. Question you guys are probably all asking at this point is, okay, this sounds pretty cool. How do I get more? Good news, flow is hackable. And by the way, when I use the term hackable, I do not mean a shortcut. In peak performance, there are very few shortcuts. I don't think there are any as far as I can tell. What we really mean by peak performance at a really foundational level is getting your biology to work for you rather than against you. Flow is the state that evolution created for all of us to perform at our best. It shaped us in a very specific way to get into flow in response to certain things in the environment, and that's what we're going to work on. So I'm going to walk you through how to get more flow in your life, and the place I want to start is with what's known as the flow cycle. So now we used to believe, if you go back even 20, 25 years ago, flow was a binary, right? You're either in the zone or you're out of the zone. It works like a light switch, switches on and off. Turns out we had it wrong there as well. Turns out flow is actually a 4-stage cycle. And you have to move through each stage before you can get into the next stage. This is also why you can't live in a flow state. I will tell you, but once a month, somebody comes up to me and says, Stephen, you got to study me. I'm in flow all the time. And for years, I didn't know what to say to it. I was sort of like, okay. Now I've just started telling the truth, which is, it's funny, we have a word for that. We call that schizophrenia. You don't get to live in flow. More importantly, a lot of the stages of the flow cycle, flow is the best we get to feel on this planet. A lot of the stages are very unflowy. At the front end of a flow state is a struggle phase. This is a loading phase. You are loading, then overloading the brain with information. This is basic skill acquisition. In a sense, flow is what happens after we've learned a skill so well, the brain can perform it automatically without much conscious interference. This is falling off. Yeah. Is that better? It seems to be fighting with me. I'm feeling it move. Wave again if that happens again. I'll try to pay attention to it. It's looking for flow. It's in the next room. So you have a struggle phase on the front end, and this is when the brain is kind of learning skill acquisition. So if you're a ball player, this is all the different things you need to learn to do to swing a bat, right? You got to keep your eye on a ball. You got to know how to swing through the pitch. You got to know how to step into the pitch, all the various skill sets. Flow is what happens when they snap together, right? For a writer, when I'm in struggle, this is when I'm diagramming my books, right? I've got maps of possible plot structure all over my room. I'm doing tons of research. I'm usually swearing a lot. That's struggle. And the swearing a lot is actually sort of built in. And I think this is really important. I think this is really important for us to know. I also think this is really important for us to teach our children. One of the things about peak performance is your emotions don't often mean what you think they mean, especially at this level of performance. So we have spent most of our lives believing that frustration is bad. Frustration is a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction. It's a sign that you want to stop. Turns out you absolutely need frustration to get into flow. And this could be long frustration that you're in for months and months and months where you're really just wrestling over a problem, or it could be just a microsecond of it where you feel massively uncomfortable and you lean in anyways, but you can't get into flow without going through that frustration first. So in peak performance, frustration is actually a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Second stage, this is a release phase. Frustration, we're thinking really hard about the problem. Here we just want to let go of it. Take your mind off the problem. Stop thinking about the problem. You got to put it down. The reason you have to put it down is because the brain has to take something from conscious processing, where we were in struggle, and put it into unconscious processing. And the only way it can do that is if you take your mind off the problem. What works really well here is low grade, meaning you don't want to exhaust yourself, physical exercise. Long walks work really, really well here. Research shows that building models, model airplanes, model dinosaurs, works really, really well. Gardening works really, really well. Two things to know about this. One thing that will not work at all is television. Television blocks the brain waves that you need to produce flow. I'm not going to go into why, but television is not a good release activity. You can work out, but don't exhaust yourself. Or if you want to work yourself into exhaustion, you have to follow it with sleep. Otherwise, you just don't. Flow is a high energy state. You don't have enough energy left to get into flow. And different things work different for different people. Albert Einstein, famously, through this release phase, used to like to sail a boat into the middle of Lake Geneva to do this. The problem was Einstein could neither swim nor sail. And he was continuously rescued from the middle of Lake Geneva over and over and over again. But it was so foundational to his process that he wouldn't stop. Next stage is the flow state itself. We've already talked about that. And on the back end of a flow state, this is really, really critical. There is a recovery phase. So especially if you're in a deep flow state, this is neurobiologically expensive to produce. So on the back end of it, you need to recover. You need deep delta wave sleep. You need good nutrition. You need good hydration. You need to chill out and try not to do stuff on this phase. And one of the main reasons is if you're not recovering during the recovery phase, you don't have the energy and you try to move back into struggle, you're never going to be able to get through struggle, right? You haven't recovered enough, and then you're into this really, really hard fight on the front end. In fact, this is one of the classic recipes for burnout, is not recovering on the back end of flow and jumping right into the next problem. Classic recipe for burnout. You do it a couple of times and you're all out of energy and now you're stuck. All right. Now let's get into kind of a little more of what you can do. So I like to say there are positive psychology basics. These are the 6 things that positive psychologists have decided you need for peak performance. This is not yet flow. These are foundational, and they come in 2 categories. The first 3, sleep, nutrition, hydration, and social support. Sleep, the research is really, really clear. I'm sure that almost everybody in this room is going to be mad at me for what I'm about to say, but the research shows that if you're really interested in peak performance, if you're not sleeping 7 to 8 hours a night, as a general rule, you're screwed. That's what the body needs. Now, it may differ for different people. There are people who can get by on a little less, but not often. As a rule, we need 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Nutrition, hydration, I'm not going to spend a long time here, but we at this point have a good idea what good, clean, healthy food is. Eat it. You need the energy for flow. Hydration, pretty guaranteed that nobody in this room, including me, is drinking enough water. Social support. Sorry, I've got pepper in my throat from the eggs I ate right before I came on, so we're not giving you coronavirus. Social support. You need friends. You need other people to touch you, hold you, support you. There's no way. His voice on stage? Maybe. It's not happened before. All right, so these are the 3 sort of positive psychology energy basics. You need these 3 things. The next level up gum for coughing? All right, y'all look somewhere else. Look, what's that? Is she wearing clothes? All right, thank you. That does work. We think. Second half of this equation, gratitude, mindfulness, and exercise. The idea here with all of these is flow and peak performance in general requires us to be moving from kind of a position of strength and calm. Gratitude, mindfulness, and exercise. I said earlier, there's not a whole lot you can do to change your emotional set points, to change the amount of happiness you feel on this planet. These are the three things you can do. Gratitude, daily gratitude practice takes about 5 minutes. It's nothing fancier. There's 2 ways to do it generally. I like to make a list of 10 things I'm grateful for. Just try to feel the gratitude for each thing. Positive psychologists sometimes recommend listing 3 and taking one that was really powerful and turning it into sort of like a mini paragraph. Gratitude is not some weird, mystical, spiritual anything. The issue with gratitude is, I said earlier, we take in 11 billion bits of information a second. Way too much for the brain to process. The first place it goes, the first filter it encounters, is your amygdala. This is your threat detector. The amygdala is biased for negative information. So it will take in about, or let through, about 9 negative bits of information for every 1 positive bit that gets through. So we have what psychologists call a negativity bias. Gratitude works because it tilts what you focus on. And it doesn't do this for any big way. Gratitude works, and affirmations, by the way, this is why affirmations don't work, and this is why gratitude works. We all come with a fantastic built-in bullshit detector. Fantastic, right? So if you're trying to do affirmations, if you're looking in the mirror in the morning going, I am a millionaire, I am a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, and you work at Walmart, your brain is going, shut the fuck up, man, you work at Walmart, right? That's what's happening. But if I wake up and I go, oh my God, I'm really healthy, that I'm alive, that I'm no longer coughing, that my legs work just fine, that my suit is clean, take your pick, right? There's no bullshit there. Your brain goes, oh, look at all the good things that are going on in your life. Maybe I don't need to take in 9 negative bits of information for every positive bit that gets through. Maybe it can be 6 to 1 or 5 to 1. So it has a direct impact on our nervous system. It calms us down, makes us happier. Mindfulness, same principle. Mindfulness or respiration, right? These are just breathing exercises. Focus on your breath. Focus on a mantra. The research shows that you don't even have to do it that much. 11 minutes a day is enough. Over a course of 2 weeks, will start really calming down your nervous system. Mindfulness is essentially you're minding your mind, right? That's what mindfulness means. You're basically teaching yourself that, hey, I'm happiest when I'm calm, focused, non-reactive. That's when I'm at my best. That's what mindfulness is doing. It's putting a little gap in between the moment a thought arises and the moment it turns into actual emotion, right? There's a gap in there before emotion gets attached to it, right? Actually, it's the gap between emotion and feeling. They're technically 2 different words scientifically. So emotions come in before they turn into feelings. There's a gap, and you can stretch it out, and mindfulness does that. So it allows you not to just get bounced around by life. Life stops happening to you, become much more active participant. The last one is exercise, right? 20 to 40 minutes of exercise a day, and you really want to what's important here is you want to exercise till it gets quiet up here. We all know this experience. You're working out, it gets quiet. You know what that is? Exercise-induced transient hypofrontality. It's the front edge of a flow state, actually. Your prefrontal cortex is turning off. It's shutting down. Why? Because you need the extra energy for working out. That's what happens. So step 1, if you're interested in peak performance, is once a day, you got a choice. gratitude, mindfulness, or exercise. But pretty much every day, right, you need sleep, hydration, nutrition, and social support, and then you need one of these three things. 5 minutes of gratitude, 12 minutes of mindfulness, or 20 to 40 minutes of exercise. This is the best place to start foundationally if you're interested in peak performance. If you're interested in stacking flow on top of that, this is where these 22 flow triggers come into place. A flow trigger, what Csikszentmihalyi used to call a proximal condition for flow, it's a fancy way of saying these are preconditions that lead to more flow. They're conditions either in the brain or conditions in the environment. We'll talk more about it. Two things to know here. First is that there are two versions of flow. There is individual flow. This is me in flow or you in flow. And then there's group flow. So this is everybody at that table getting into flow together as a team. You've seen group flow in action if you've ever seen a fourth quarter comeback in football. If you've ever been part of a great brainstorming session, right, where the ideas are really bouncing around, you're all on fire, that's group flow in action. Coach Carl talked about seeing group flow with his basketball teams. When we work with the Navy SEALs, group flow is what allows SEALs to be SEALs and so forth. So there are 12 triggers that will drive you into individual flow, and there are 10 triggers that will create group flow. And by the way, there are probably way, way, way more triggers. This is just where the science is at right here, right now. So flow follows focus. The state can only show up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now, fully focused in the present moment. So that's, you can't hear me. It fell away again. You were not on your job. Can you hear? All right. These triggers do one of three things neurobiologically. Either they drive norepinephrine or dopamine to our system. These are the two of those neurochemicals we talked about earlier. As I said, neurochemicals are multi-tools. They do a lot of different things in the brain. What these neurochemicals do is they drive focus, among other things. So norepinephrine and dopamine, we feel this as excitement, as enthusiasm. It's where you can't not pay attention to the thing that's right in front of you. You're really focused on it. That's norepinephrine and dopamine. The other thing these triggers do, some of these triggers do all three, some do two, some do one. They can lower cognitive load. Cognitive load is all the crap you're trying to think about at any one time. It's the weight of everything you're trying to hold in your head. And if I lower cognitive load, I free up more energy. You can use it to pay attention. Most of you have probably heard of Maria Kondo, the Japanese woman who wants to come clean your closets, right? Why does she want to come clean your closets? Why the hell would cleaning your closets ever produce peak performance? What the heck is going on there? It's because when bad things happen in our lives, anything emotionally salient, the brain goes, what else is in the room? Because it doesn't want that to happen again. So let's say I was wearing this jacket 5 years ago when my wife and I got in a horrific argument, right? I may have completely forgotten about the argument, but my brain has not forgotten about the argument. So when I walk into my closet and I'm trying to figure out what am I wearing today, and I'm just ruffling through my clothes and I touch this jacket, some part of me is going to remember at a subconscious level, you were wearing that when you got in a fight with your wife and bad juju. And it's going to load up your brain just a little bit. Just take a little tiny bit of energy, right? When you clean your closet, you're literally cleaning out the emotional residue of your life, and it's giving you more energy. It's lowering cognitive load. That's why that works. That's why cleaning your desk also works. All right, so that's what all these triggers do. Now what we're going to work on is we're going to focus on introducing 3 of these triggers into your life. That's what we're going to do for the rest of the time we have together. So the first one I want to talk about is complete concentration. For those of you who are not looking at the monitors, that says, fuck off, I'm flowing. The reason it says that is when we work with organizations, this is really the first thing I say. So when I come into an organization, I tell people, if you cannot put a sign on your office door that says, fire truck off, I'm flowing, you can't do this work. Turns out what the research shows is that to maximize flow, and I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback from people in this room because I always do. Nobody likes what I'm about to say, and you're going to like it worse when I tell you this is the single most important thing you can do in your life to improve performance is, unless you're a night owl, and we'll come back to that, unless you're a night owl, start your day with 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration. So uninterrupted concentration means no cell phone, no email, no instant messages, nothing especially that could tug on you emotionally, right? And when I say start your day, I really, really advise, even if it's not possible for everybody, that you do this before you even check your phone, right? Checking your phone is Russian roulette with your emotions. Could be good, could be bad, we don't know. These days it's a little more bad than good, but maybe next week will be better. 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration. And if you can't muster 90 to 120 minutes, don't say, oh shit, I can't, this flow stuff isn't for me. I don't have 90 minutes to 120 minutes. Start by starting. Start with a half an hour and start with your most important task. That's what you want to do in these 90 to 120 minutes. And when I say your most important task, I mean highest value. What is going to, when you face your day and you say, well, what would allow me to win today? What's the thing that would move the needle the most? That's what you focus on. I get a lot of pushback on this one from managers. Right? Managers and lawyers, by the way, because they're both groups that spend most of the day in conversation with other people. That's most of the job. And what I always say is, and good managers and good lawyers know this, your job isn't actually to have those conversations. Your job is to manage organizations and strategy and things like that. So spend that morning time figuring out how to do that best. 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration. Autonomy here matters. So you want to spend the 90 to 120 minutes on a task of your own creation. And if it's a work task, if it's something somebody else has asked you to do, especially if you're not too fired up to do it, you got to reframe it in your brain. You got to think, okay, I don't want to do this, but if I do this, I'm going to learn X, Y, or Z, and it is that aligns with my passion, my purpose, who I am as a person. So you want to reframe this stuff, and the reason is autonomy, freedom, is actually coupled to attention. We cannot maximize focus if we are not the ones choosing to focus. So that's really, really important. I like to talk about this 90 minutes, 120 minutes. The reason it's so long is you want it to be non-time. I say what the line says is non-time and no one. No one meaning you'll want to be alone as much as you possibly can. You want to be solo for this. And non-time means you don't want to feel time stressed. So I like to start my day writing every day at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I write from 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. That's my first major writing session. And the main reason I do it is because the world's still asleep. And it doesn't matter if I have to spend an hour and a half working on 2 sentences, because that's what it takes to get them right. I don't feel the pressure. There's no time pressure. The other thing I always like to tell people about this, the last thing, is have your conversations in advance. You can't suddenly be starting your day with 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration if you're working at home and your family doesn't know what you're doing or why, right? You can't do this at work if your bosses or your employees or your coworkers don't know what you're doing. You have to talk to people. Hey, I'm switching things up. My interest is maximizing productivity, maximizing performance. Remember that. You're about to become 500% more productive. You're going to get that time back in spades for sure. You're going to end up with way more free time than you've ever had before by doing this, but you have to commit on the front end of it. All right, first exercise. So I want you guys to walk through this distraction checklist exercise. The way to think about this is I like to end my day by turning everything off that could distract me in the morning. So what you want to do is you want to make a list of those distractions. So what are your top 5 distractions, right? What are the easiest ways to remove them from your life, and when should you be removing them from your life? So just make a list of the 5 things that distract you the most and figure out when you're going to be turning these things off on the front end of your 90 to 120 minutes. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on that. I like to do my distraction. I like to end my day essentially by going through my distraction checklist and turning everything off in the morning. And one of the reasons I have it on a checklist is because I can't argue with the checklist. Right? I can't just, I'll leave Twitter on. No. The checklist says it. It's gone, right? And, trust me, like when a new book comes out and you want to check your Amazon ranking every 30 seconds, right? Like sticky to. All right, so that's the first thing, complete concentration. You absolutely want to maximize that. Okay, cool. How do you approach the thing that you're concentrating on? How do you approach your most difficult task? There is a way to approach this. So I want to talk about Flow's most powerful trigger now, what is often called the challenge skill balance or the golden rule of flow. So the idea here, as I said, flow follows focus. So we pay the maximum amount of attention to the thing we're doing when the thing we're doing slightly exceeds our skill set. You want to stretch but not stop. You want to be working, pushing on your skills as hard as you can, ish. And what I mean by ish is if I were to describe this emotionally, I would say, hey, flow shows up not on, but very near the midpoint between boredom and anxiety. Boredom, there's not enough stimulation here, I'm paying no attention. Anxiety, whoa, way too much stimulation, I'm paying too much attention. In between is this sweet spot, what's known as the flow channel. Now, a number of years ago, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi and a Google mathematician sat down and they tried to figure out, can we put a number on it, right? Is there any way we can put a number on the difference between challenge and skills? And the number they came up with was 4%. That to maximize the challenge skills balance, the challenge of the task at hand needs to be 4% greater than our skill set. Now, I'm sure that helps a lot, makes it a lot clearer, right? All right, so what the hell is 4%? The reason I like to mention that number is for people who are shyer, quieter, meeker, a little more timid, a little less type A, 4% is tricky because it's outside your comfort zone. So if you want to do this work on a regular basis, you have to learn to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's built in. You're going to be uncomfortable. But the thing about 4% is you're not going to be crazy uncomfortable. And the problem with peak performers, I would guess most of the people in this room fall into this category, is peak performers like to take on challenges that are 10%, 20%, 30%, 40% greater than their skill sets simply for the fun of it, right? For the fun of the challenge. Oh, this will be thrilling. And I'm not saying don't go after really big, high, hard goals. They're critical. Motivation science tells us simply by having a high, hard goal, you can get an 11 to 25% boost in motivation. That's huge. That means if an 8-hour day is your baseline, if you're at the upper end of this, you can get 2 extra hours worth of work done, right? 25% boost, 2 extra hours worth, simply by having the right goal around what it is that you're doing. Huge and important and very easy way to increase productivity. That said, have your big, high, hard, huge goals, but chunk them down, make them small enough so that the thing you're focusing on, the thing you're going to spend 90 to 120 minutes on to start your day is 4% greater than your sweet spot. So I'll talk about what that looks like in real life in a second, but I first want to talk about this. So this is my favorite example of what that 4% will get you. So this is my friend Alex Honnold. Anybody see Free Solo? Everybody see Free Solo? All right. So Alex was at the heart of Free Solo. And in it, he free soloed El Cap. This is Alex in 2012 free soloing, meaning he's climbing without ropes and without protection, Half Dome in Yosemite, meaning if he falls, he dies. Half Dome is enormous. It takes most climbing teams a day, sometimes a day and a half, sometimes two, to climb Half Dome. People bring portal edges. They sleep on the side of the cliff. It's that big. In 2012, Alex climbed Half Dome with no ropes and no protection in an hour and 22 minutes. It is the rough equivalent of running a 4-minute mile in about 37 seconds. Most people consider it the single greatest feat ever done in the history of action sports. There are a couple others that are up there, but it's one of the top 5 for sure. And if you ask Alex, how the hell did you do that? He will tell you 4% plus 4% plus 4%, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year for a career. That is the secret to doing the impossible. So what does the challenge skill balance look like in action, right? What does it look like in our lives, in corporations? I'll give you 3 examples, and then we're going to jump into another exercise. So in my own life, I write every day. So when I start a book, 4% is 500 words a day. So I have a very clear metric, and when I say 500 words a day, I can give you 350 words in my sleep no matter what. It's easy. But most ideas, like if I want to convey an idea to you in writing, it takes 300 to 350 words. At 350 words, you have to transition to your next idea. Transitions are one of the hardest things to do in writing. So 500 words a day when I'm starting a book means I'm going to do the stuff that's easy, and then I'm going to be uncomfortable and fighting myself a little bit and working really hard for about 150 words. In the middle of a book, after I sort of know what I'm doing a little bit and know where the book is going, that becomes 750 words a day. Changes, right? At the end of a book, it becomes 1,000 words a day. And obviously, common sense tells us that we're going to feel differently every day. You're going to have lots of energy today, not so much energy tomorrow. So when you tune this challenge skill balance for yourself, right, what you want to do is you want to figure out, okay, I've got my most important task, this is the thing I'm going to spend 920 minutes on. What puts it at about 4%, right? What puts it slightly outside my comfort zone, and how do I standardize that in any way with 500, 750, 1,000? So what does this look like organizationally? I'll give you a couple examples. Toyota is my favorite example. So back in the 1990s, as many of you probably remember if you were alive then, Toyota exploded. It went from just another car company to owning the world basically as a car company, and they made one change, and the change is known as Kaizen. Kaizen is this idea that if you work at Toyota, anywhere at Toyota, you can improve the company. So if you work on the line, your job isn't just to put widget A into slot B all day long. You got to do that, but you also have to make the line better. You have to make anybody else working on the line better. You have to try to improve the performance of the company. It's just a little thing. It's a little psychological shift. But what it did was it took employees from unengaged automatic robots to, holy crap, I'm engaged. It tilted up the challenge level just a little bit, right? I'm making widgets, but I'm also trying to make Toyota better as a company. And just this little tweak was enough to maximize it. Facebook does something really interesting. Will you pull my slide back up? Thank you. So Facebook has something called Hack-a-Month. The idea here is Facebook came to the conclusion that a lot of people who work in tech don't take the job they want, a job that aligns with their intrinsic motivation, aligns with their passion and purpose. They take the job they can get, especially at entry-level jobs, and even as you move up in the company. So what they came up with is this Hack-a-Month idea. If you work at Facebook and you've worked there for over a year, you can go and join another department any department you want for a month. You can hack a month. So you've been in marketing for a really long time, you can jump into coding. You've been a coder forever, you can jump into marketing. And it seems like common sense would say, God, if you took a coder and you put them in marketing, they're not going to really be able to contribute that much to marketing, right? Like they don't know how to do that. They know how to code. But because it moves the challenge skills sweet spot and suddenly it ups the challenge level for everybody and they're really passionate about what they're doing, what ends up happening is they get phenomenal results out of this practice, out of this lateral movement that they allow in their company. And a lot of people end up staying. After you've worked there a month, you can petition the company, and if you're good at it, right, if you really produced, you can stay in that job. This is a great three different looks at how this happens. So in your own life, this is exercise number 2, right? We're going to tune the challenge skills balance in your own life, right? And you just want to ask yourself these simple questions, right? Where are you coasting in your life, especially with your most important tasks? Where do you actually need to turn up the challenge level, right? Where do you need to turn it down? Well, sorry, my eyesight is failing me. What are your unconscious habits in each case? This is really, really important. A lot of us build all kinds of kind of unconscious habits around what we do, especially like ways to keep us working a little bit less. So see if there's any unconscious habits. Do you consistently coast? Do you consistently overwork yourself, right? And the final thing you got to ask yourself, and this is the most important, what does success look like? What happens if you get this right and suddenly productivity, creativity, motivation, learning, et cetera, goes right? And most important, when I say what does success look like, what I really want you to think about is what does it feel like? What is the somatic address? How does it make you feel in your body? What would that success feel like? Those feelings are really strong mnemonic devices. They're really good to steer by. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to work on this one. The last trigger we want to talk about today is immediate feedback. So flow follows focus, right? We pay the most attention to the task at hand when we know how we're doing at the task at hand, right? When we know how we're doing, when we know how to improve performance. And the difficulty with immediate feedback is if you think about your current work environment, how often do you get feedback? Quarterly reviews? Yearly reviews? This is nowhere close to immediate feedback. So classic examples of immediate feedback, surgery, right? Surgeons are the only class of doctors that get better the longer than are out of medical school. Everybody else, their skills decline. Surgeons get better. Why? Because if a patient dies on the table, they know they screwed up. That's immediate feedback. Sports produce immediate feedback. You serve in tennis. The ball either goes in or it goes out. You know instantly. What does this look like in business? One place this shows up in business is the agile software movement. If you're not familiar with agile software, the idea is, Gmail is a great example. Used to be, if you wanted to make a mail program, you would put 4,000 features into your mail program and then you would ship it to the general public. And God, I hope they like it. Google said, no, that's a dumb idea. We're going to introduce Gmail with 4 features, and then we're going to let customer feedback tell us what we should add. And so they iterated and iterated and iterated and iterated. You see the same thing inside of Skunkworks. These are innovation accelerators. Over the past 100 years, pretty much when any large corporation has wanted to spur innovation, the way that has been the most successful is to create a Skunkworks, a separate autonomous division that does this. One of the reasons it works so well in a Skunkworks is they privilege rapid experimentation. Jeff Bezos once said to me that the success of Amazon depends on how many experiments I run per year, per month, per week, per day. Why? Because it tightens feedback loops. And 1, you gain way more data about the thing that you're doing. 2, you get into flow a lot. So quick things on feedback. You want to choose your metrics for feedback, right? And your metrics need to be about the task and not your ego. If the feedback you're getting is sort of pointed at your ego one way or the other, it's going to turn that prefrontal cortex back on. That you're going to hear about yourself, you're going to start thinking about yourself, you're going to get self-conscious, suddenly that's back on and you're kicked out of flow. So you want to focus on something that is very task-specific for feedback. I will argue for everybody in this room, especially because you guys are a close group who know each other well or semi-well, pick a feedback buddy. I have a guy on my staff who reads everything I write a day and a half after I write it. And he gives me very minimal feedback. We'll talk about what that looks like in a second. But if you can't afford to have somebody on your staff who gives you that feedback, find a feedback buddy. Find a partner in this room that you can get more regular feedback from. And most importantly, you want to figure out what your MFF is. That is your minimal feedback for flow. So you don't just want to find a feedback buddy and let them loose on your life and, yeah, just tell me everything that I'm doing right or wrong. First of all, they probably don't even know your business, so they don't even know what kind of feedback to be giving you, right? So you have to figure that out for yourself. You need to sort of determine what is your minimal feedback for flow. And I'll give you an example from my own life. When I write, I only need to know 3 things to steer by. Is it boring? Is it confusing, or is it arrogant? Arrogant meaning I'm using lots of really fancy words and trying to show off with language, which is a bad habit of mine. So that's the minimal feedback for flow. So a really good, we're gonna spend 2 minutes doing this, and I'm going to tell you, actually we're not even going to spend 2 minutes doing it because we're rushing out of time. What I will tell you about figuring out your minimal feedback for flow is this. Watch over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We now know what microflow is. We know what macroflow is. And by the way, microflow, we spend about 5% of our work life in microflow, often without even noticing it. So you're all experiencing it. You just haven't realized it. Pay attention to it and ask yourself, what kind of feedback did I get recently? Did it help me get into here? Over time, you're going to figure out, this is the bits of feedback I got. This helped me drive into flow. That's the minimal feedback for flow. That's what you're going to ask your feedback buddy for. Steer your feedback buddy. Work with them. It takes a little while to get it right. And really, 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 you want to keep them in a box. This should not be a long process. This could be done in 10, 15 minutes, a couple times a week. Right? This is not a big thing. You definitely don't want them to tell you everything they think you're doing right or wrong in your life. That's demotivating, isn't going to work. I didn't choose these 3 triggers randomly. We did a bunch of work with USC to figure out what are the 3 flow triggers that are what are the flow triggers in general that are most important for creativity and innovation, which seems to be the most important skill in business in the 21st century, and it is these 3 triggers. So if you're looking for a formula for amplified innovation in your own life or your companies, this is what it appears to be. Now, in action sports, what happened? Why did it explode? Why did we see so much performance? It's because it was mostly unconscious. Very little of this was conscious, but they started to build their lives around all of flow's triggers. They were sort of at the center of the work they do. If you look at like novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk, these are all things, by the way, that produce dopamine. Action sports is packed with them. But the important thing is it's not just action sports. Whenever you see a giant culture of innovation, so this could be Silicon Valley over the past 20 years. This could have been Seattle during the grunge era. This could be New York when the punk scene is first emerging, or LA when hip hop is happening. Anytime you see a lot of creativity coming out of one place, you're seeing a culture built around these triggers. Last thing I want to tell you is that this isn't all that hard. So my old company, not the Flow Research Collective, my older company, we did a 6-week engagement with Google. It was a joint learning exercise. We teamed up with Google and we trained them up in 4 high-performance basics, the stuff we talked about earlier, hydration, nutrition, sleep, etc., and then the use of 4 flow triggers. for 6 weeks. And we did about an hour's worth of work a day. And meaning, talking, and then they would do 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration, that sort of thing. After 6 weeks, we saw a 35 to 80% increase in flow. That's astounding. When McKinsey did their original work, they figured out, as I just told you, we spend about 5% of our work life in flow. If we can increase it to about 20%, so 15% boost, overall workplace productivity would double. So what does this look like for a full stack? It looks like sleep, nutrition, hydration, social support. That's your basic level. Once a day, gratitude, mindfulness, or exercise. And then distraction management, right? You want to do this daily at the end of your day. Then you want to have 90 to 120 minutes for your most important task. You want to attack that task by pushing about 4% harder than you would. And on the back end, you want to make sure you're getting immediate feedback. I want to say before I open this up for questions is I think that all the information that I've kind of been talking about this morning puts sort of a terrible yet wonderful burden on each and every one of us. Because you got to sort of ask yourself, right? Like, what are the impossible challenges that you're not particularly doing in your life? What would you do if you could be 500% more productive? If you could be 400 to 700% more creative? You could cut learning rates in half. This is exactly what flow makes available to each and every one of us. What you choose to do with this information, that is entirely up to you. Thanks for listening. All right, I think we have, what did we say? We have 25 minutes for questions, and they've got microphones somewhere. I cannot see through the lights, so speak into the microphone. I won't be able to see you until you start talking because I won't be able to find you. But, and for those of you who need bio breaks, please feel free. I'm not going to take it personally. Please. Shout then.
What was material around the Google that you said they had 35 to 80% more flow? How did that materialize in the business?
So he wanted to know what the 35 to 80%, it materialized all over the place because we didn't select one particular group. So we took people from all over, facilities, coding, take your pick. But for example, with the coders, what it means is way more work done in way less time and much cleaner code, right? Quality goes up, productivity goes up, and so those are the kind of things that we saw. All the metrics, all the flow and business advantages, that's what we really saw. Anybody else? Whoever's got the microphone, let's do it that way.
I'm involved with a team that's mostly introverts and engineers that are night owls. And so you mentioned something about
thank you so much. This is the only difference on this one. I'm married to a night owl as well. So I'm an extreme lark. I focus best first thing in the morning. The only point here is you can't really fight your circadian rhythms, right? Most of us focus best in the morning, but there are night owls and they focus best at night. So with night owls, you want to start your evening work session with 90 minutes to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration. You just don't want to fight your own biology. You want to work with your biology. So for your teams of coders, right, and some of us, by the way, sort of you have to work all day and you're a night owl, right? And then so you want to just make sure you have a little bit of break. Whatever work you did, take a little nap, get a meal, something to sort of reset state a little bit before you go into that 90 to 120 minutes of uninterrupted concentration. Does that make sense? Cool. Next question.
Early in your presentation, over other side.
Hi.
Early in your presentation, you talked about comedians and jazz artists as groups that are in the flow. Anecdotally, it seems like those two groups also have a high propensity for self-destructive behavior when they're not necessarily in the flow. Is there any correlation or byproduct result in that, or are they just completely unrelated?
So I'm going to doubt your premise. I think you hear about the comedians who are self-destructive and things along those lines. But I will also say you raise a very good point, which is this. Flow is the most addictive state on earth. Those are the 5 most addictive neurochemicals the brain can produce. Flow is the only time they show up at once. So what often happens is people get really high on flow on stage, for example, and they come off stage and they don't want the high to go away. So they chase it with artificial ways of creating those same neurochemicals. And you see this a lot. We saw this over the past 5 years in the pro surfing world, where we've had death after death after death because methamphetamines has been ripping through that community, and it's people chasing the flow high. And there's not really, like, the only thing I can tell you on this one is you sort of have to be adult about it. And what I like to tell people is you just don't want to ride that high too high, and you don't want to ride the low that follows, because that recovery period is a low, right? There's a bunch of feel-good neurochemistry. It's all coming into your system, and now it's getting flushed out of your system. You no longer feel good, and it's built in. There's nothing you can do about it. You've exhausted the very thing the brain uses to make yourself feel good. And you just have to know that's coming, and you have to accept that's part of the cycle, and you don't want to try. If you can avoid chasing this artificially, you're better off. In fact, I often train people, so after the flow state has sort of like ceased to be useful for you, meaning you're done doing the hard work that you're doing, I try to do something to end it. So I'll do 10 minutes of breath work, mindfulness meditation, just to clear my head, or I'll purposely sit down and do something that I know will block flow, like watch television for 15 minutes or something like that, to pull myself out of that state, because you don't want to exhaust all the neurochemicals in your brain, because then you'll feel really bad, right? So you want to pull yourself out of the state a little early, and you just have to sort of know that's coming. And it requires emotional maturity. You cannot do this work without some level of emotional control. And if this is another reason mindfulness is really, really helpful, because it'll give you more emotional control along the way. But great question.
You just kind of squared up what my question was going to be, given that flow states are intermittent, right? And they're not stable across time, but you can access them. You just started talking about, I guess I'm interested in what you think the distinction between contemplative or mindful practices and flow states.
My opinion, I don't think matters here, but the science, on the other hand, tells you that the difference is actually the medial prefrontal cortex. So this is the part of your brain that covers creative self-expression. When in Stealing Fire, for example, we talked about how trance states and meditative states and mindful states are similar to flow, but not exactly. The biggest difference is when we are mindful, the only caveat here is if you're doing really complex Tibetan tantric practices, meaning you've been studying Tibetan Buddhism for a really long time, and they've sort of gotten into more advanced principles, or the Kabbalistic Judaism, the meditations with these two systems, these are the only two that this is not true with that I know of. There's probably more, but these two don't qualify. Every other meditative system turns this part of your brain off. Why? You're trying to make self disappear. You don't need to creatively express yourself when you're trying to make the self disappear, and just quiet it down. In flow is essentially a state of creative self-expression on overdrive. So the difference is the medial prefrontal cortex and some of the neurochemicals. So meditation, we didn't talk about neuroelectricity. I'm not going to talk about it by now, but meditation will tune neural anatomy and neural electricity, but it doesn't tend to do a hell of a lot in terms of driving neurochemistry. It can. I have yet to see any meditation that can get at anywhere near the stack that flow provides, especially dopamine. Can't get anywhere near it. So there's a fairly big difference, and the way I like to talk about it is meditation, mindfulness, is great training for flow. And there's research, Michael Posner is sort of the god of attention science. He was writing papers on these ideas back in the 70s. So this is fairly well established by now.
Check, check. That's me over here. Hello. Hey, Stephen. My name's Andy Seth.
Can we turn these spotlights down a little bit so there's maybe...
Yeah, I mean, let them see me. You know what I'm saying? I'm the CEO of a company called Flow, and the premise of
Thief. Give me my name.
It's a holdings company. For all my companies, it's to try to induce flow for all of my team. So when I wrote down the distractions, I'm pretty sure a lot of us had similar things: Slack, email, Zoom, meetings, etc. What are your recommendations for probably 80% of us that have listed communication as the core distraction? How would you solve for that for teams?
It's a tricky one, and what you want is your whole team on the same damn page, right? You just want everybody to know, hey, distraction is the greatest crusher to the peak performance we're trying to achieve. So that's what I meant. Have your conversations. Everybody on the team is going to thank you, right? Like, you're going to be really happy about that. In fact, I was talking about coders a second ago. The guys who created PeopleSoft did a bunch of studying on these exact kind of distractions in coders, and they found that coders in flow, once they're distracted, will get knocked out, and it will take 15 minutes to even get back in again if they have any chance of getting back in. Sometimes you can be knocked out permanently, but it's minimum going to cost you 15 minutes. And if you think about that 15 minutes where you're going to be 500% more productive than normal, wow, are they stealing from you, right? And they're stealing from your company in terms of productivity is the other thing, and stealing from their own lives in terms of what they're capable of achieving. So that's what I mean by I don't have any secret weapon here other than having your conversations out loud and just trying to prioritize, because some of that communication is absolutely necessary for the thing that's you're doing. So you just try to do it ahead of time, right? Or save it to the end. Just build in times for communication, and we all know this, right? We all first of all, I'm a firm believer that nothing good happens in a meeting with more than 3 people present. I don't think that's a meeting. I think that's a waste of time. And in dealing with peak performers and top executives and CEOs and everything else for 30 years, I found very few people who disagree with me on this point. There are very few reasons to have really, really big meetings. Usually, there are a lot of ego reasons to have really big meetings. And usually, a lot of what happens at really big meetings is people talk so they can show off, right? Most meetings that we think we schedule for an hour can probably be shrunk to half an hour or 20 minutes. We have 15 to 20-minute meetings at the Flow Research Collective. And if you want to have more than that, you better have a very good reason for why we need more than that. We have 2 meetings a week that are longer than those times. Everything else is shrunk down. And we're not the biggest company in the world, but we're not small. And, we've been doing it for a while. So no magic pill, right? But, honesty and conversation and everybody on the same page, because everybody wants to be better right? Who doesn't want to be better at their job? Who doesn't want to get more done, better quality in less time, right? And the point is, if you do that, you take an experience flow that is probably in all of your lives right now, fairly unreliable, fairly unrepeatable, and it just sort of randomly happens. And you can make it reliable and repeatable and get way more of it. So that's the upside, right? That's why you're having these conversations. Somebody back there. You guys got to fight it out among yourselves.
I have the microphone here.
Ah.
Somebody else. Okay. Just really quick. Thank you, first of all, for being here. This has been great. So is Flow just for grown-ups?
No, it's actually not, in fact. So let me pause by saying I don't have children. I don't like children. I am not an expert on anything that has to do with children. I'm not your guy. I can't stand the little fuckers. That said, I believe in transparency. That said, here's the cool thing about kids. Kids are actually born flow prone. 2 reasons. One has to do with brain waves. I said I wasn't going to talk much about brain waves. Basically, flow takes place when your brain is near the alpha wave, theta wave borderline. So I'm not going to go into it, but kids, adults, our brains are in what's known as beta, high beta most of the time. It's a very fast-moving wave. It looks like a jagged, like there was an earthquake happening if you look at it on an EEG. Below that is an alpha wave. It's a slower wave. It's sort of where the brain is when you're in daydreaming mode, right? It's calmed down a little bit. Kids naturally produce more alpha waves than beta waves. So it's a lot easier for them to get into flow. Bonus, their prefrontal cortex is not fully developed till they're 25, right? This is why kids will take enormous risks and things like that, right? The executive control that comes from a fully formed prefrontal cortex, it's turned down, which is a bad thing for most kinds of responsibilities and probably drives you guys as parents crazy sometimes. But for producing flow, it's really powerful. So what we found is if you actually train up kids in flow and how to do this stuff, they get it really fast. Oh, by the way, one thing I want to tell you. So when I say flow shuts down your sense of self, video games produce a lot of flow. So if any of you have been screaming at your kids, trying to get their attention, they're playing video games, and you think they're ignoring you and they're pissing you off, they're not ignoring you. They literally can't hear you. Their ears have been turned off. Because flow will do that. It will funnel off non-critical sound away. So literally they can't hear you. So kids are flow prone. They have a very easy time getting into flow. And in actually, one of the places you could see this in the real world really clearly is in skateboarding. So for a lot of different reasons that have to do with basically how violent the sport is and how tough it is on your body, skaters started coaching kids a lot earlier in flow stuff than we saw in a bunch of other sports. And if you tune into the X Games, you'll often see some 13-year-old skater beat the 30-year-old skaters. And you don't see that, right? 30 years old is athletic peak for most people, 27 to 31, right? But this is one of those sports, and it's because they're getting educated in flow so young.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Very inspiring. I have a question. Mastery. What is the role of mastery? And specialist versus generalist, like for an athlete or for someone that can get really better by doing that 4% versus someone that is like shallow in many things and connections rather than skills.
Great question. I have less than a minute to answer it, but I'm going to try it really quickly. So what we know is that, I've got 5? Okay, good. What we know is that there are 5 really powerful intrinsic, meaning internal, motivators in the world. They are curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And they're linked. They're biologically related. And what that means is, so if you want to maximize flow, this is one of the things I did not tell you, but we do a lot of training in this. You want to start by turning your curiosities into a passion. Passion is nothing more than the intersection of multiple curiosities. That's how you do it. You look for where 4 or 5 things that you're super curious about intersect, and you play there. And playing there and getting small successes, small wins at the intersection of 4 or 5 curiosities, that's how you build passion. When you take the thing that you're passionate about and you attach it to a grand world problem that it can be used to solve, that's how you get purpose. Once you have purpose, you need autonomy, which is the freedom to pursue your purpose. Once you have that, you need mastery. Mastery is the desire to get better at the skills that fulfill your purpose. These are big drivers. The best way to produce mastery is the challenge skills balance. So 4% every day, harder and harder. Now, the generalist versus specialist question is interesting, and there's no really great answer. It is different from person to person, but I will tell you that what we've seen be most effective is kind of what I like to call a deep generalist, right? Generalists do better in this world, success-wise, than specialists. We know this across the boards. but you don't just want to know a little bit about a ton of stuff. You want to have 3 or 4 or 5 things that you're really great at. So it's wider than this is the only thing I do, my one skill. You have a little more breadth, right? But it's not super general. And there are reasons that have to do with creativity and flow and that sort of stuff and how the brain works that seem to make this most effective. And I also want to say there is nowhere near enough research here. So I'm giving you what we know, and I want you to know there are like huge holes in this research that we could probably drive a bus through in this around this question. So there's still a lot to know, but the best book on the subject is my buddy David Epstein's book, Range. And if you guys haven't, especially if you have children, if you have not read Range, run, don't walk. It's so good. And it's basically, the subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And it's all the research that I've been talking about kind of summed up in one place. It's awesome. And that's the best place to go deep on that question. All right, folks. Sarah's up next. Thank you so much for your time today. It was really fun to be with you. Go get them. Pardon me?
Can you share the slides with them?
Yes, I will. Yes.
We will. Awesome. Thank you, Stephen. One more round of applause. So Stephen just gave us permission to share the slides with you, and we are recording this, and so you'll be able to actually go through this again. And we decided to bring him here to speak back in June. So having been through this and seen his talk several times now, it definitely is the kind of content that takes going deeper and hearing it again and again, because there are so many nuggets. So we hope you enjoyed that. Before we close, and we will close on time, so don't worry, I want to just acknowledge a couple of the people who have made this possible. So first off, the Ben and CTLF teams, it takes a ton of work to do an event like this, and they have just done an amazing job. So would you please give them a round of applause? And just a special shout out to Carly Crosby and Carol Boyko, who did so much work preparing for this. Thank you. And also, thank you to our partner, Blackstone Entrepreneurs Network. Many of you have been a part of lots of different partnerships. This is the most aligned, valuable partnership that I've personally ever been a part of, and I just want to thank you all for everything you're doing to help Colorado be a better place. So thanks to Ben. And our CTLF Board of Advisors is literally alongside us co-creating the future of CTLF and the work that we do here. If you're a member of our Board of Advisors, just wave. And a thank you to your companies as well. Your contribution, thank you for that. Your contribution to this organization and to the community is priceless, and we appreciate everything you do. Our advisory boards, so CTLF is built on the principle that if we are inviting people to co-create our work alongside us, it's actually, we're building in immediate feedback. It's literally helping other people to be a part of the decision making, and they are leading every one of our programs. So the CEO Forum, Personal Development Forums, Strategic Connections, and Wise Women. So if you're part of one of those boards or partnerships, would you please also just raise your hand? Thank you for your leadership. If you're a part of the VIP session, it's going to start at 10:45 in the A-Gate room, and you've got a little ticket inside your name tag if you registered. So as we close, in Stephen's book, The Future is Faster Than You Think, he and Peter had basically talked about how every industry is going to change in the next decade. And not just a little bit. Every industry is going to literally reinvent. And they said that basically, if we're going to be able to compete in 10 years, we need to have a product that is 10x, even 100x better in order to just compete in 10 years. So if our companies are going to have to make those kinds of leaps, it stands to reason that we're also going to need leadership and company cultures that are 10, 100x better. And at CTLF, we believe that it's going to be the companies that are led by heart-level leaders who attract the most talented, forward-thinking, innovative people to their teams so that they can actually make those kinds of leaps. So let me just quickly tell you what that means. For us, it's marked by 5 characteristics: humility, engagement, authenticity. On this one, I read a study. There's a woman who she is a head of global diversity for an enormously huge company that's worldwide. And they did a study and they proved that the offices where they had authentic leaders were 20% more effective. A regenerative approach to business. And finally, a spirit of togetherness. So let me give you a picture of what this looks like as we send you out the door. Who has seen the movie The Biggest Little Farm? I have been talking about it nonstop since I watched this the first time. It is brilliant. And if you've heard me tell the story again, just humor me again, because I think it is a really beautiful picture of what leadership can look like in the future and what company cultures can be in the future. So it's a story about a couple, and they decide that they want to be farmers. And so they quit their jobs, they take their dog, and they buy a piece of land in California. And this land is completely dead. I mean, they pick up the soil, it's dry, it's cracked. And they find a mentor in regenerative farming, and that person comes and helps them start restoring life into the soil. They put microbes in, they start adding creatures, planting things, they bring in animals. And about 3 years in, things are going well and the farm is growing and they've got these huge orchards, but they've been working hard for so long and their mentor is dying and something terrible happens. Snails come and they infest the orchards and they eat everything. They literally devastate this entire crop and there's nothing left. And so they've lost everything. And instead of looking at the snails and saying, hey, snails, you are not a contributing part of this farm. Like, how dare you? You are out of here. Because don't we do that stuff a little bit? Instead of that, they do something extraordinary. They bring in geese. And so these geese come and they gobble up all of the snails and turn it into fertilizer for these trees. And now the orchard is stronger, healthier, more alive. So they've taken something that was a menace and they've turned it into an absolutely vital part of this entire ecosystem. And at year 7, something beautiful begins to happen. This environment is so rich, so diverse, so strong, so full of life. Every single creature is thriving, that every creature begins to keep every other one in perfect balance and in perfect harmony. I mean, in essence, the farm is farming itself. So imagine if this was also a picture of your company, of your leadership, of your culture. Every team member, every vendor, every supplier, every contractor, even the menacing ones, are now a vital, contributing, beautiful piece of your ecosystem. You're in a state of flow and everything is thriving. So, this is our mission, to develop heart-level leaders so that they, or rather so that you can create authentic, healthy, prosperous cultures for the 21st century. And this is what we believe it's going to take in order to move our companies forward into the future and to actually make the kind of leaps Stephen is talking about possible. So we do this through 3 program pillars. I'm just going to briefly mention these because often we have people say, well, tell me exactly after they come to an event like this, how do I get involved in this organization? So the 3 program pillars are well-being. Our personal development groups focus on a place to, in a setting of peers, work on our own leadership, our own lives, so that we can actually thrive. Abundant outcomes. The Colorado CEO Forum is an annual event and an ongoing community for CEOs of 15 employees or more, or $3 million and up companies. Strategic Connections is our flagship program. I wish I had time to tell you about it because it was started off this brilliant study of Vietnam vets to understand why they build strong relationships and they're okay. It's a peer group specifically designed to be able to help leaders develop strong relationships to grow ourselves and our businesses. And finally, the Leadership Growth Experience, which is a short-term program offered in either a 2-day format or an 8-week format where we design our leadership to thrive. And the last pillar is community. Our CTLF membership is just a place for any leader who aligns with heart-level leadership values to get involved in anything that you feel is interesting, just like an event like this. And then Wise Women is a community of senior executive women who have significant decision-making inside their careers, and it is about relationships, support, leadership growth, and philanthropy. All of our work is really founded on the belief system that thriving has everything to do with the quality of our leadership, the way we design our roles, and the people we surround ourselves with. So if you have a desire to get involved in anything, ask any of us, ask the people who raised their hand earlier. With that, thank you so much for coming. We hope that as you look to the future, that you will really surround yourselves with peers who will push you on to be better, and that you'll put this flow work to a really powerful place inside your life so that you can literally change the world alongside us. So cheers.